We are talking the brand new Scream movie. It is the fifth installment in the franchise and also the first not to be helmed in any capacity by the late, great Wes Craven. I think this October I'm going to go back and rewatch a lot of Wes Craven movies because there's actually a handful I never saw. So, need to do that. I was reminded of that rewatching the Scream movies. But where to begin with Scream? Again, this is directed by Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett, two of the men behind Radio Silence. And it's clear, I will say, from the jump, that these guys do have an admiration for the Scream series. They clear. It's not a case of what happened with Scream 3 when it was written by a different writer, Aaron Kruger, I believe, who was a producer on this movie. Usually it's Kevin Williamson who's written these movies.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason 3 was so rocky, was because it was A, written in a little bit of a haste, and B, it was a brand new screenwriter. Where this, you can tell these guys are familiar. These guys are behind
Ready or Not.
VHS. Ready or Not, that was the one I forgot too.
Yeah,
Ready or Not.
that's a favorite of mine. I love that movie.
That was a very good one. That was one that like came out of nowhere and just kicked ass through and through. But where to begin with this? I will start by saying that the first thing that I'm going to think of when I think of this movie going forward, I really like the opening scene of this.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the opening scene of this. This one was fun. And I knew that it was going to be fun when they used the phrase elevated horror. I knew that it was going to be fun from that very instance and stuff. And I think that's also a big credit, too, to the character Tara Carpenter, who's played by Jenna Ortega. She's very good here. She was in Insidious Chapter 2. And also the main character, too. And I recognized her immediately. She's from In the Heights as Melissa Barrera.
Okay.
And
I thought, I was like, I think I've seen her in a musical. Oh, it's the woman from West Side Story. No, it's actually In the Heights. Because in the moment, I was conflating the two. And it's like,
understandable.
Damn, she get messed up. Seriously, she gets messed up probably the most out of like a lot of the opening kills, at least in the first two.
Yeah, easily. Yeah, I was surprised to see her as well, her come back for it. But I mostly enjoyed this. There's one big issue I do take with it, and I think that this movie, the crux of this movie, because all of these movies, like the second movie, was lampooning the cliches of sequels. The third movie was lampooning the cliches of trilogies. The fourth movie, it was about remakes, but yet Scream 4 wasn't a remake, so that made it kind of odd in that way, where it wasn't spoofing or making fun of what it actually was.
Yeah.
Now this movie is more in line with what it's trying to spoof, and it's the requel. Now, if you don't know what a requel is, it's a film that's predicated on the subject matter of an earlier movie, but it is not a remake of the original, nor is it a direct sequel.
Yeah.
So I guess you could say like Creed. I guess you could say Jurassic World.
Yeah.
You could say Halloween. Would you consider, this is what I was debating myself when I was watching this in the theater, and I don't want to deviate from here, but I was like, I think Ghostbusters Afterlife kind of counts as one too.
It is.
Really, honestly, including where at the end they say for Wes or for Harold at the end of Ghostbusters Afterlife too. I was like, yeah, you know what? I think I'm gonna draw a parallel here too.
Yeah,
For sure.
the whole thing about it being a requel, and when I heard they were making Scream 5, I knew like this had to be what they were going for, because this has just been a thing in Hollywood since 2015, when both of these films, the highest grossing films of that year, were technically requels. Jurassic World, which was a sequel to Jurassic Park, but also its own thing, but had legacy characters show up, and then Star Wars Episode 7, which is its own thing, had legacy characters show up, a sequel to the original stuff, but anybody coming in fresh could still enjoy it. And I was just like, oh, like, once that made a ton of money, and like year after year we got requels with, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis coming back for Halloween 2018, and plenty of other ones you can list off. The minute I heard Scream 5 was announced, I'm like, they're definitely going to be spoofing or making fun out of the whole requel thing. I didn't know it was called requels at the time.
Neither did I.
Like, I mean, like, I
kept calling them legacy.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's the same thing. I call them legacy.
Well, even in the movie, they're just like, there's no terminology for it, so we're just going to make one.
Yeah, and it's a very gray area, because you could justify after, like Ghostbusters Afterlife. It's just fresh in my mind. I saw it just a couple months ago. You could justify that as a sequel. You could justify that as a direct sequel, but it's the way that it like functions as a reboot as well.
Yeah.
And that's why this movie's called Scream and not Scream 5. I wanted it to be called 5 CREAM, but that's beside the point. I wanted that, but that's kind of the crux of this whole thing. And it's a really good scene too, where one of Sam's friends explains how a requel operates. And that was kind of a nice nod to like Wes Craven there in terms of how they try to contort the logic of this whole thing.
And honestly, it all kicked off, or it like all paid off in the end. Where for me, maybe not completely, but for me, I was like, okay, in the scene where they're showing, this is very meta. I think you'll know what I'm talking about. Where the girl who explains that whole thing, she has that monologue. She's watching Randy in the first Scream movie,
the stab
watching
movie.
Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, and it's like, okay, if there's a series that's gonna do this, Scream makes sense, because even from the first one, there's a character who's obsessed with horror movies, and like the whole point of even the first one, even back in the 90s, they're making fun of these tropes. So you know what? That is Scream's function, in along with being, you know, a few other things, being, you know, good solid movies on top of that. Its main thing is that, yeah, it's very meta from the get-go, and I respect the hell out of it, and it paid off. That angle of it paid off here.
What say you, Joe?
No, so, God, I don't even know where I want to go with this, like, because we've been jumping around with the movie so much too.
It's a weird one to talk about.
It really is. I'll go with this. Like, I mean, in terms of it being a requel and following those rules and everything, I want to kind of like continue almost where Dom was alluding to, where it's like it does kind of like, you know, again, and you were pointing this out too, Steve. It points out the rules of a requel and everything, and like the flaws of requels or just sequels in general. But yeah, it does make those mistakes from time to time. And you know what, too? It's like, just because it brings it up doesn't excuse it. One of the criticisms I have of this movie, and I don't want to make it sound like I didn't like this movie. I'm going to tell you right now, I did. I had a lot of fun with this. And I was very happy to see Scream come back and be as faithful as possible. And even feel almost like Wes Craven himself had like something to do with this. But one of the complaints I kind of have with the movie, I'm totally fine if they want new characters to come in and like do a sequel. I actually thought most of the new characters, especially Tara and Sam Carpenter, I thought they were really interesting. Some of their friends though were a bit bland, but the legacy characters coming back, I thought what they did with Gale was great. I thought what they did with Dewey was amazing. I thought this was David Arquette's best performance of the franchise. But Neve Campbell's just kind of crowbarred into this movie. And it's like they kind of make fun out of that, like when it comes to legacy sequels, how like, you know, yeah, they just bring in the legacy characters and everything. It's like, yeah, but you kind of did that with Sidney Prescott. She's just thrown in at the end of this movie just to be in the bloody finale.
I give it 2.5 out of 4 stars. I was mostly entertained by this movie. I really, truly was. You know, it's cool to see this Scream come back, and I'm kind of worried now because this thing's making way more money than even they anticipated. I'm kind of worried we're going to get a sequel in the next 2 years. I kind of like how these movies have taken like
their time.
Like, because the first 3 came out in a span of 4 years, and that was almost too much. Yeah. That's why it's even remarkable that Scream 2 came out the following year and was as good as it was. Yeah. Exactly, where Scream 3 took like 2 extra years to come out, and it's the worst of the series. And then Scream 4 came out. What was it? 11 years ago? Yeah, it came out 11 years ago, and then you have this one, obviously 10 years after that. So I kind of like. I mean, there's going to be a retirement home Scream at this rate with Neve Campbell at this rate. But I hope, like, because we've already gotten, people forget we already had the MTV series, which I watched a little bit of. But I just don't think – I think the cardinal sin of this, beyond – we can argue about whether or not they should have killed all the original characters off in the requel. That's my personal opinion. That's one thing I think would have made this thing stand out. That's just me. I don't know about – you guys are mixed on that. I think the biggest cardinal sin of this movie, I think, is just how underwritten and homogenized everybody is. Yeah. So it's 2.5 out of 4 for me. What say you, Dom?
Honestly, like, so the first Scream, I would give a 3 out of 4. first two scripts, I give 3 out of 4 stars pretty solidly. I would also have to go with 2.5, a strong 2.5 out of 4 stars. For this new one, because it really wasn't that bad at all. It was pretty solid. It was a good time and some fun nods. But when you hold it up to how, I don't want to say innovative that first one was, but it had like an extra oomph to it, probably because it was a 90s movie and every movie had that, that weird attitude about it. But it made enough moves where it's like, okay, you're not brainless. You're a cut above the schlock. But you're kind of stuck in this in between where it's a little hollow. So, 2.5 out of 4.
Joe, send us home on Scream.
For me, this franchise, I've been telling the guys this in the green room and everything. This to me is like one of my favorite movies of the 90s. I love it. I love the first one a ton. I love the second one a ton. 3 is disappointing. I like 4. I think 4 is a pretty good reboot or remake, whatever the hell they want to call it. And as far as this one goes, I think this one is good as well. It's about the same level as I thought about 4, which, if I had to give all these star ratings too, if Dom did his, the first one to me is 4 stars. The second one to me is 4 stars. The third one's 2, maybe 1.5. I really am disappointed by that third one. But 4 and this one are both 3-star movies to me. I think they're good enough, as movies, but to me, what was I gonna say? To me, it does have its missteps. I know, I've been criticizing the movie a ton throughout this review, but I did have fun with it. The kills are good. I think most of the jokes are actually really well done. Like I said, I loved what David Arquette did in this movie. I think his character was the most entertaining when he was on screen. I also thought Sam and Tara were great together. So if they do make a sequel, which again, I don't want them to, because I think this kind of does wrap everything up fine, and to me it's this is a good place to stop. And also, what are you going to talk about in the next Scream movie? Because this one, you at least had something. You had the requel talk, and you touched on elevated horror. Now, if they're going to go crazy with 6 and actually make it some A24 movie and get weird with it, okay, sure. But it's what's there to do now? Because that was the thing about Scream, as Steve was saying earlier in his review. First one's touching on horror movies, second sequel, so on and so forth. What's this next one gonna touch on? Unless if it is just really just playing with your expectations, because I've read interviews where it's they wanted to do crazy stuff with this, but they thought about well, if we want to make it a requel, we got to kind of do some of the safe stuff. Where at the start of this movie originally, they were gonna kill off Ghostface. They were gonna kill Ghostface in the opening scene. That's who dies in the opening scene. And then the Ghostface killers, it's from their point of view, and they messed up. And now they got to figure out how to continue on with, or the one Ghostface killer has to figure out how to do this with only just one killer or something. And it was gonna be from that point of view. And I was like, damn, that would have been actually kind of cool. But I get it.
That'd have been interesting.
You want to go back to basics and everything. So maybe with this next one, you get experimental with it, just like how they said Stab 8 did. Maybe that's what they were kind of teasing for the future of the franchise. But yeah, I thought it was fun and everything. 3 out of 4 stars. Dom, what were you about to say?
I just want, I want to see more of the adventures of Sheriff's Deputy Markiplier screwing up, failing to catch Kat Dennings Jr. Because I legitimately thought that was Kat Dennings' little sister. I'm like, goddamn, who that? No, it's Mikey Madison apparently. Cool, whatever.
Yeah, I like the idea. If they're going to do a quick sequel, and by quick I mean within the next 3 years, give or take, I do think. I mean, they've earned the right now to go experimental with it. I think the Ghostface perspective would be pretty sweet. I don't know how you'd formulate it, but that's kind of the attraction to me about it, is that I don't know how that would go. I don't begrudge them for the formula that they took here, because they kind of have to do a reintroduction, being gone 10 years and how fast this culture moves. But I would like to see if they are going to do another one, which they probably will. The question is when. If it's going to be a quicker turnaround than the last couple, I think that would be the way to go, is something like Joe was highlighting, something experimental.